Why was the room so loud, yet she felt so unseen? Men shifted in their seats, boots scraping metal floors, maps sliding beneath restless hands. Radios buzzed faintly from the corridor, static like ghosts lingering just outside. And there she was, sitting near the edge of the long steel table, the one place no one noticed until they needed someone quiet enough to listen and steady enough to carry the weight they couldn't. Her name was spoken by the colonel without ceremony, just 4 syllables clipped and flat, but the ripple it sent through the room was different. Heads turned, eyes flicked toward her. For a moment, even the shuffling stopped. She didn't move much, didn't nod more than a fraction, no smile, just presence. Some of them knew her reputation, though few knew her story. She wasn't the loudest, not the fastest, not the one who demanded attention. But she had the unnerving ability to be exactly where she needed to be when everything went wrong. She didn't wait for glory, didn't chase recognition, but somehow it found her anyway, in the silent acknowledgments of those who survived beside her. But sitting in that room, listening to the colonel mark lines across maps, she carried something none of them knew, something heavier than rifles and ammunition. This wasn't just another mission for her. The convoy route looked simple on paper: mountains, valleys, a chain of villages where civilians were caught in between 2 storms. The colonel explained the risks, the choke points, the places where an ambush could turn steel and flesh into wreckage scattered across snow. Every soldier listening knew it wasn't theory, it was probability. Someone wouldn't make it back, maybe many. Yet she listened differently. Not because she was afraid, but because every word the colonel spoke brushed against a memory she'd locked away for years. A memory that smelled of gunpowder and winter. A memory of a brother she never saved. The colonel's voice faded and the chatter rose again. Soldiers leaned over maps, trading plans, asking sharp questions, frowning at answers. She stayed quiet, hands folded on her lap, face unreadable. But inside she heard something else. That night, that last breath, that one voice calling her name before silence swallowed it whole. And though she would never tell them, that was why she was here. The first night in the forward operating base pressed down heavy. The plywood walls groaned in the wind. Drafts crept through seams, carrying the sharp smell of diesel, damp canvas, and iron. Someone had lit a small heater in the corner of the room where they all gathered, trading stories they half believed. The glow painted their faces in shifting orange light, tired eyes, cracked lips, forced grins. She sat apart, not because she disliked them, but because she couldn't pretend as easily. They laughed too loud at jokes meant to disguise fear. They spoke of home in bursts, then went quiet as though they'd remembered too much. The youngest among them, a sergeant with cheeks that hadn't lost their boyishness, spoke about his dog back home. How the animal slept at the foot of his bed, how it'd tilt its head when it didn't understand. His voice cracked once mid-sentence, and he swallowed it down fast, pretending it was nothing. Another, a tall corporal with a sharp tongue, interrupted with humor that landed like sparks on wet ground. "Better hope your dog doesn't forget you," he said, grinning. But no one laughed long. The heater hummed, filling the silence. She sat in the corner, rifle laid across her knees, hands moving in a rhythm she knew better than sleep. Cleaning it, piece by piece, cloth against steel. Not because it needed it, she had already cleaned it twice since arrival, but because her hands needed something to do when her heart remembered too much. A medic sat near her, not close enough to intrude, but near enough to notice. His eyes carried fatigue, like someone who'd already seen too many endings. For a while, he just watched the glow of the heater. Then his voice cut through softly. "Why'd you sign up for this?" The others went quiet, pretending not to listen. Her pause stretched long. "Same reason as you," she murmured, eyes still on the rifle, voice low and steady. "Because someone has to." The medic nodded slowly, not pressing further, but his gaze lingered, searching for something unsaid. And she kept the rest locked inside. Because the truth wasn't for them. Not the part where she once watched her younger brother disappear into the smoke of a burning village. Not the part where she'd stood helpless in snow too deep, too red, while his voice broke against the night. That truth was hers alone. Morning broke pale and bitter. Frost clung to wires, boots, and metal. The mountains rose sharp against a white sky, their ridges like blades waiting to cut anyone foolish enough to cross. Engines rumbled awake, gears grinding, exhaust staining the air with black streams. She moved wordlessly, adjusting straps, checking her pack, her breath forming clouds. Around her, others tried to mask their nerves with chatter. The corporal who cracked jokes yesterday cursed at a stubborn latch. The young sergeant smiled faintly, clutching a letter he folded into his pocket. They moved out. Snow crunched under boots. Tires groaned against frozen dirt. The convoy stretched long, steel beasts carrying supplies, men, hope, and with it, the risk of drawing fire like a beacon in the storm. She walked near the middle, where her eyes could scan both the ridges ahead and the soldiers beside her. Her scope wasn't raised, but her senses were sharpened, every nerve awake. The mountain didn't need to roar to remind them it could kill. Halfway through the pass, she froze. Movement small, a flicker near a ridge of stone. Her hand lifted sharply, and instantly the column stilled. Boots halted, radios hissed low, hearts hammered in silence. She held her gaze on the outcrop, every breath slowing until her heartbeat matched the rhythm she needed. But when she looked again, it was gone. Just white snow against gray stone. The lieutenant leaned in, whispering too quickly, "False alarm." She didn't answer, because something in her gut told her otherwise. The others shifted, muttering, brushing snow from their shoulders as they started moving again. But she carried that image with her, quiet, steady, and unresolved. Like a shadow waiting to return. At night, the dreams came back. They always did. A village buried in snow, gunfire echoing against hillsides, screams tangled with the wind, and her brother, his hand gripping hers tight, dragging her toward the tree line, shouting words she couldn't hear over the storm. He let go only once, just long enough to raise his rifle, firing into the dark, just long enough to buy her a breath. And when she turned back, he was gone. They told her it wasn't her fault, again and again. But guilt had a way of whispering differently. And now, in these mountains, surrounded by men who still believed they'd all make it home, she carried that whisper with her like a shadow. A reminder. A debt. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to pay it back. That night she lay awake long after the others slept. The heater's glow had faded, the wind howled against walls that felt thinner than skin, and snow rattled against the roof. She listened, to breaths, to silence, to the unspoken truth that tomorrow could break any of them. And when her eyes closed, her hand brushed the cold steel of her rifle, as if to anchor herself to something solid. Because deep down, she knew the mountains weren't finished with them. Not yet. What did the mountain hide behind its silence? The convoy crept forward the next day as though it, too, feared the ridges. Engines rumbled low, wheels grinding against icy earth, every sound too loud, too vulnerable. The valley narrowed, the walls of stone rising higher, shadows clinging to cracks and ledges like secrets waiting to fall. She walked with her rifle slung, eyes scanning the upper reaches, every flicker of movement carved into memory. The others tried to mask their unease, boots crunching, breath fogging, chatter forced. But their voices didn't rise far. The cold stole sound quickly, swallowing it into the vastness of white. Beside her, the young sergeant shifted nervously, fingers brushing the folded letter in his chest pocket. He caught her glance, offered a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Feels too quiet, doesn't it?" She said nothing, only nodded once. Because yes, it was too quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't peace but waiting. By midday, the sky had shifted, clouds dragging across the peaks like heavy curtains. Snow began again, soft at first, then heavier, flakes thick enough to blur the ridges, to turn distance into haze. Visibility dropped and the world became a tunnel of white where shapes might hide. The lieutenant signaled a halt. Radios crackled, men muttered, hands rubbed against the cold. The trucks idled, exhaust streaming into air already heavy with frost. She crouched low, studying the valley walls. The snow fell steady, but the silence beneath it remained sharp. She could feel it pressing against her skin. The corporal, the one who joked too much, tried to ease the tension. "This is nature's way of giving us cover," he said, smirking. "Even the enemy won't see us now." No one laughed. The medic leaned on his pack, eyes narrowed. "Or it's giving them the same cover," he muttered. She said nothing, but her gaze stayed fixed on a dark crease in the rock above. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw movement again, there just behind the curtain of snow. Her hand tightened on her rifle. Then the lieutenant barked orders to move. The convoy groaned back into motion. The shadow vanished into white. That night the base felt smaller. The heater struggled, sputtering as the fuel thinned. Men huddled closer, breaths visible, hands trembling less from fear than from cold. The corporal tried another story, this time about a girl back home, a promise made, a future imagined. His voice cracked halfway through. He laughed it off, but the sound felt hollow. The medic sat sharpening a knife with deliberate strokes. His face unreadable, but his eyes, those tired eyes, betrayed the weight he carried. She caught his glance once, and for a moment something passed between them. Not words, just recognition. Two people who had seen enough to understand silence. The young sergeant unrolled his sleeping bag, muttering softly to himself. She caught fragments, prayers maybe, or words meant for someone far away. He looked younger in the dim light, almost childlike. For an instant she wondered if his family knew how scared he really was. She didn't ask, she never asked. Instead, she stepped outside. The wind struck hard, carrying snow that bit against her cheeks. The night sky was barely visible, clouds choking the stars. The mountains loomed darker than shadow, ridges etched like teeth against the horizon. She stood there for a long time, rifle resting against her shoulder, listening to the void. Because the silence spoke louder than any briefing. The next morning, frost coated everything. Helmets, rifles, trucks, even the edges of their boots. It glittered faintly in the pale sun, as if mocking their weariness. The convoy stretched again, crawling forward. Every turn tightened the valley walls, every bend another chance for an ambush. Her eyes scanned constantly, stone, snow, shadows. Nothing escaped her lens. And yet the question clawed at her mind. Was she seeing ghosts? The flickers, the movements, the shadows she couldn't prove. Were they warnings, or was the past bleeding into the present? Her brother's face flashed across her vision more than once. That last night, his voice calling her name, his body swallowed by snow and fire. She blinked it away, jaw tightening. Focus. A sudden crack echoed through the valley. Not gunfire, stone shifting. A small avalanche tumbled down a slope ahead, snow and rocks spilling into the path. The trucks braked hard, men swearing, scrambling to clear the way. Her rifle was already up, scanning ridges, because sometimes avalanches weren't accidents. But nothing moved, just the hiss of snow sliding, the growl of engines idling. "Natural," the lieutenant muttered, too quickly as though convincing himself. "Keep moving." But she wasn't convinced. Not at all. That night sleep refused her. She lay awake listening to the others breathe, each inhale and exhale loud in the cramped space. The heater's glow flickered, shadows crawling across plywood walls. And the dream came again. Her brother's hand pulling hers, his face half lit by fire, his voice lost in the storm. Every time it ended the same, he let go. She woke with her fist clenched, nails biting into her palm, breath ragged. The medic stirred across the room, opening his eyes briefly. He didn't ask, didn't speak, just gave her a look steady knowing. For a moment she almost told him, almost let the truth escape. But the words froze in her throat. So she stood, stepped outside, and let the cold strike her lungs until the memory dulled. The morning broke sharp, sunlight glinting off ice like shards of glass. The convoy prepared again, men moving slower now, shoulders heavier. The jokes had thinned. The laughter had vanished. As they set out, the young sergeant walked beside her. His voice was low, hesitant. "Do you think we'll make it through?" She looked at him, saw the raw honesty in his eyes. He wasn't asking as a soldier. He was asking as a boy who still believed in promises. She didn't lie. "I don't know," she said quietly. He nodded, accepting it, perhaps even grateful for the truth. But what she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that some of them wouldn't. She felt it in her bones, the way the mountains felt alive, watching. And soon they would show their teeth. By afternoon, the storm returned. Snow thick, winds cutting, visibility collapsing. The convoy slowed to a crawl. Men shouted just to be heard over the roar. Her scope fogged, wiped, fogged again. Every ridge blurred into white. Her gut twisted. This was it. Somewhere in the storm, they were waiting. And when they struck, she knew it wouldn't be random. It would be precise. Deliberate. The silence she had carried all this time was about to break. And when it did, there would be no turning back. Why did the snow feel like it was holding its breath? The convoy slowed to near stillness, trucks groaning against the incline, men trudging alongside, eyes darting nervously at ridges hidden by thick sheets of white. The storm had swallowed everything, sky, mountains, even sound. Boots crunched, but the noise disappeared into the howl of wind. Engines coughed, muffled by snow. The world was a tunnel of gray and silence. She walked near the middle, rifle tight against her shoulder, scanning through shifting veils of white. Every flicker of shadow could be movement. Every dark crease in the rock might hide a rifle. Her heartbeat was steady, her breath measured. But her gut told her the storm wasn't just weather. It was cover. The sergeant, the young one with the folded letter in his pocket, trudged beside her. His cheeks were raw from wind, his lips cracked. He tried to speak, but the storm tore the words away. He gave up, lowering his head, shoulders hunched. That was when she saw it. Not a shadow this time, not imagination. A muzzle flash. Sharp, bright, too close. The first crack split the air, so loud it drowned the storm. A bullet ricocheted off a truck, sparks flying, and then the mountains answered in chorus. Gunfire erupted from the ridges above, echoing down into the valley. Chaos. Engines roared as drivers slammed into gear, tires spinning in snow. Men dove for cover, rifles up, voices shouting broken orders through static and fear. The world was no longer white silence. It was fire, smoke, blood, and screams. She hit the ground instantly, scope raised, breath slow. Her heartbeat didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble. The storm narrowed into her world, a single line of sight. And there, hidden but not enough, the shooter. One shot, a pause, another. Her rifle cracked, sharp and final. The figure slumped, sliding back into snow. But more moved. Shadows darted along ridges, flashes sparking. It wasn't one. It wasn't two. It was a line of them dug in, waiting for this moment. An ambush. The convoy was trapped. Men scrambled behind trucks, bullets tearing through canvas, shredding metal. The young sergeant froze for a split second, eyes wide, breath ragged. She grabbed his shoulder, yanking him down just as a burst chewed into the ground where he'd been standing. "Stay low," she barked, voice calm, cutting through the storm. He nodded, swallowing hard, clutching his rifle with trembling hands. The lieutenant shouted into the radio, his words fractured by static. "We're pinned, we need." Another explosion cut him off, fire blooming from the front truck. Shrapnel sprayed, smoke poured thick, men screamed. She scanned again, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the weight pressing in. One breath, one scope, one target she squeezed. Another figure dropped. Beside her, the medic dragged a bleeding soldier behind cover, hands moving fast, voice low and urgent. His face was pale but steady. She caught his eye briefly, just a flicker of recognition. Two people working the same way, quiet, deliberate, relentless. The corporal, the one who always joked, wasn't joking now. His face twisted in panic as he fired blindly into the ridges, rounds wasted, his shouts ragged. She reached over, pushed his barrel lower. Wait, breathe, aim. He looked at her like she was mad, but her calm was contagious. His hands steadied, if only slightly. The storm of bullets didn't stop. Trucks shuddered, snow churned red, the valley echoing with thunder. And still she worked. One shot, pause, one shot, each breath cutting through chaos. Minutes blurred, it could have been 5, it could have been 50. Time no longer moved normally. Only rhythms, gunfire, breaths, heartbeats. Finally the ridge began to quiet, fewer flashes, shadows pulling back, retreat. Then silence again, not peace, just absence. The survivors lay sprawled, gasping, bleeding, stunned. Smoke rose from ruined trucks, the air thick with cordite and iron. 3 were dead. More wounded. The medic's hands were slick with blood, his voice hoarse from shouting for bandages, pressure, morphine. The young sergeant sat against a wheel, staring at the folded letter he'd pulled from his pocket, whispering words too soft to catch. The corporal shook, rifle clutched too tight, laughter gone. His lips moved like he was trying to make a joke, but no sound came. She stood slowly, scanning the ridges one last time. Her breath fogged in the cold. Her hands were steady. But her chest ached with something she couldn't name. Because once again, she had survived where others hadn't. And the guilt was as heavy as the rifle in her hands. That night the base was hollow. The heater burned, but no one gathered around it. Men sat apart, shadows bent, eyes hollow. The dead were gone, wrapped and carried, but their absence was louder than any noise. The medic sat with his head in his hands, blood still beneath his nails. The young sergeant wrote furiously on the back of his letter, as if the words themselves might keep him alive. The corporal stared at nothing, lips trembling. She cleaned her rifle again, slowly, precisely, ritual more than need. The medic lifted his head eventually, eyes red but steady. "You saved more than you lost today," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "Doesn't feel that way," she murmured. His silence was answer enough. Because he knew. He felt it too, the weight of what couldn't be saved. Later, when the others slept in restless fits, she stepped outside once more. The snow had stopped. The stars burned sharp above the ridges, cold and eternal. She whispered a name. Her brother. And the wind carried it away, just as it always had. The convoy would move again. It had to. Supplies couldn't stop. Missions didn't pause for grief. Orders pressed forward like inevitability. But now, every man in that group knew the truth she had carried all along. That survival wasn't guaranteed. That mountains didn't forgive. And that sometimes, the only thing standing between life and silence was someone willing to breathe calm into chaos. She didn't ask for glory. But once again it had found her. And she hated it. Because glory never came without ghosts. The lieutenant called a briefing the next morning. His voice was tight, clipped, eyes sunken. Maps unrolled again, fingers tracing paths, contingency stacked on contingency. They would change the route, flank wider, move slower, quieter. He glanced at her once, just once. Not as an order, not as a request, but as acknowledgement. She gave the faintest nod. Because though she carried ghosts, she also carried resolve. And the mission wasn't done. Not yet. The next leg of the journey would be harder, more dangerous. The ridges steeper, the paths narrower, the enemy emboldened. Every step would demand more than strength, it would demand will. and she wondered, not for the first time, if she still had enough left. But then she remembered the face in the snow, the hand that once pulled hers, the voice that shouted her name before silence claimed it. And she knew. She would carry it forward, even if it broke her. Especially if it broke her. Why did the sound of rain suddenly feel louder than the voices around her? Alina sat inside the makeshift command post, water dripping off the tarps, radios hissing with broken signals. The storm outside had been pounding for hours, drenching the earth, turning dust into mud. Soldiers came and went, shaking their heads, carrying soggy maps, trying to force order into chaos. Yet all she could hear was the rain. Each drop on the roof above seemed to echo against her chest, like a warning she couldn't decipher. Her team had made it into the valley, but what they had found wasn't what anyone expected. Intelligence had promised them a cache, weapons, perhaps, or contraband hidden by a local militia. What lay beneath the collapsed barn they'd uncovered, however, was something else, something older. The men whispered about it in fragments, never finishing their sentences when she walked past. A bunker, a storage chamber, sealed doors with symbols no one recognized. Why was it buried so carefully? Why was it so quiet even when opened? She felt the pull of it, not just curiosity, something closer to dread. "Lieutenant," a voice broke through her trance. It was Ramos, mud streaking his cheek, rifle slung lazily but his eyes alert. "We've got the generator running again. You want first look, or should I let the techs poke at it?" Alina blinked, pulling herself back into the present. "I'll see it." They walked together, boots sinking into the wet ground, the storm muffling every other sound until it felt like they were moving through a different world entirely. When they reached the barn, its skeletal frame groaning under the weight of rain, she ducked inside. The bunker door loomed at the far end, a slab of metal carved into the earth. Wires now trailed along the mud, feeding power to a floodlight that bathed the door in harsh white. The soldiers standing around it shifted uneasily, their shadows long and nervous. "Looks like Cold War," one muttered, "but not quite." Another shook his head. "Doesn't fit the schematics, no venting, no serials, nothing." Alina stepped closer. The air was cooler near the door, unnaturally so. She placed her hand against the surface. Smooth, no rust, no warmth. It was as if the rain and mud outside couldn't touch it. A memory pressed against her, her brother's voice, the night before he deployed. "Don't always trust what you're told. Sometimes the silence around a thing is louder than the noise." Her chest tightened. She whispered half to herself, why was this hidden? Behind her, Ramos shifted. "You okay, LT?" She nodded quickly, pulling her hand away. "Cut it open." The techs moved in, hauling gear, attaching cutting torches. Sparks soon lit the chamber, spraying against the wet walls, sizzling as they hit puddles. The men worked methodically, the noise deafening in the small space. Alina stepped back, her eyes darting to every corner. And then it happened. The lights flickered, just once, like a breath being held. The floodlights stuttered, then came back on. The soldiers didn't notice, too busy working, but Alina did. And in that half-second of darkness, she thought she saw something move. Not outside, not in the mud. Inside the seam of the door. She froze. The torch hissed louder, biting deeper into the metal. A strip of orange glowed along the edge. One of the techs grinned, sweat dripping despite the cold. Almost there. A boom ripped through the barn. Not an explosion. A sound, deep and resonant, like metal being struck from the inside. The torches sputtered. The floodlight burst, plunging them into darkness broken only by the glow of molten metal. Shouts erupted. Men scrambled for flashlights, weapons half raised. Alina felt her pulse hammering against her ribs. "Hold," she barked, her voice cut through the chaos, steady, firm. "No one fires, lights now." Beams of white danced through the dark, shaky hands trying to steady them. The door stood there, scarred but not broken. The cut hadn't finished, yet something had answered. One of the younger soldiers whispered, "Ma'am, what if it's occupied?" The question lingered, not just in the room, in her. Occupied. She thought of the way the silence had pressed on her when she first touched the door, of the cold, of the way the rain had seemed louder, as if the earth itself was holding back a secret. Occupied. Her throat felt dry. "Everyone out," she said finally. "Pull back now." The men hesitated, confused, reluctant, but Ramos didn't. He moved first, barking at them to clear the barn, shoving gear aside, ordering torches off. Slowly they filed out, muttering, glancing back. When the last bootstep faded into the rain, Alina stayed, alone with the door. She crouched, fingertips brushing the damp soil, listening. Nothing but rain on the roof, no sound from within, no movement. And yet she whispered, "What are you?" Her voice felt swallowed by the air. The silence was thick, pressing against her eardrums. For a moment she almost turned away, almost followed her men into the storm. But she didn't. She stayed, kneeling, hand pressed once more to the cold surface. And this time she felt it, a pulse, subtle, slow, not mechanical, not random. A heartbeat. She jerked her hand back, eyes wide. The storm outside seemed to roar louder, thunder rattling the barn's skeleton. She rose to her feet, chest heaving, forcing herself to breathe. Her radio crackled. Ramos again. "LT, we've got movement on the ridge, multiple signatures, not ours." Her body snapped into focus. She glanced once more at the door, then turned sharply toward the exit. Whatever was inside could wait, for now. She sprinted into the storm, mud splashing against her fatigues, rifle pulled tight against her chest. Soldiers were already moving, forming a perimeter, rain blurring their shapes into silhouettes. The ridge above flashed with faint lights, scopes maybe, or something else. She slid into cover beside Ramos, both of them soaked, breath sharp. "Scouts," he muttered, "or hunters." Her eyes flicked back toward the barn, barely visible through the sheets of rain. Her skin still tingled from the echo of that pulse. "Doesn't matter," she said, her voice was steel. "We hold here." Yet even as she spoke, she knew the truth. The enemy on the ridge was what scared her most. It was the heartbeat behind the door. Why did the ridge lights vanish all at once, as if swallowed by the storm? Alina squinted through the rain, visor fogged, eyes straining against the blur. One moment she had counted at least 6 faint glimmers on the crest, movement she could almost trace through the sheets of water. The next, they were gone, not fading, not retreating, gone. "Tell me you saw that," Ramos muttered beside her. His rifle was steady, but his voice betrayed a tight edge. She nodded slowly, forcing calm into her tone. "Eyes open, don't assume they left." The soldiers crouched low along the muddy embankment, weapons aimed upward, nerves electric. Every rustle of branches, every roll of thunder seemed amplified. The storm pressed against them, rain pounding harder, as though nature itself was trying to drown the sound of what was, or wasn't, there. Alina glanced back toward the barn. Even half-shrouded by weather, its silhouette was unmistakable. Broken roof, leaning beams, and beneath it that door, that pulse. She swallowed, throat dry, the echo of it still trapped under her skin. "LT," Ramos again, his voice low. "You feel that?" She frowned, shifting. The ground vibrated faintly beneath her palms. Not thunder, not artillery, a rhythm faint as if the earth itself was breathing. Her jaw clenched. Positions hold. No one fires unless ordered. The men obeyed, though unease rippled through them. She could feel it, like static in the air, a weight pressing down on their shoulders. Fear wasn't foreign to soldiers, but this wasn't the same. This was something deeper, instinct clawing up from the gut, warning without explanation. A crack of lightning split the sky. For a heartbeat, the ridge lit up in stark white. Figures stood there, not 6, not scouts, dozens, motionless, dark outlines against the flash, gone again before anyone could aim. Gasps broke out. A few rifles clicked off safety. Ramos swore under his breath. Alina's chest hammered. She raised her fist sharply, silencing them. Hold. But inside, she wasn't sure she believed her own command. She thought back to that night, her brother leaning on the porch rail, eyes distant, cigarette smoke curling in the dark. Not every war is about bullets, Lena. Some, you don't even realize you're fighting until you're already bleeding. She had laughed then, teased him for speaking in riddles. Now in the mud, with storm and shadows pressing on every side, she finally understood. A voice broke her thoughts, one of the privates, small, young, face pale even under grime. Ma'am, permission to. He never finished. The ground shook, not violently, not enough to throw them off balance, just enough to feel like something heavy moving beneath. Alina snapped her head back to the barn. The silhouette trembled, dust spilling from its broken beams. The door. Her breath caught. Contact, another soldier screamed. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked into the ridge, tracer rounds streaking red through the storm. The figures were there again, moving now, darting between trees. Return fire sparked, rounds slamming into wet earth, splintering wood. Shouts mingled with thunder. The battlefield dissolved into noise and blur. Alina pressed her back to the embankment, rain stinging her eyes, adrenaline surging. She fired controlled bursts, but her mind kept splitting, half on the ridge, half on the barn. The two threats bled into one another, impossible to separate. A grenade burst near the perimeter, spraying mud. A soldier cried out, clutching his leg. Ramos dragged him down, teeth clenched, shouting for a medic. Alina dropped beside them, firing again. "We hold this line," she roared, voice cutting through storm and chaos. No fallback, no collapse. And yet, as she spoke, the vibration grew stronger. Beneath her boots, beneath the barn. Not thunder, not shelling. Movement. The firefight dragged on, minutes stretched thin. Men fell, others filled gaps, the line buckling but never breaking. They fought like ghosts themselves, shadows in the rain. And through it all, Alina's eyes kept darting, unwilling, toward the barn. At last, silence began to return. Gunfire thinned. The ridge dimmed. The figures retreated, fading into mist, disappearing into storm as suddenly as they had come. The battlefield stilled, leaving only rain and ragged breathing. Alina lowered her rifle slowly, every nerve still taut. Around her, men shifted, muttering, checking magazines, dragging the wounded back. Relief should have come. It didn't. Because the ground still trembled. "LT," Ramos' voice was hoarse, his eyes fixed behind her. It's opening." She turned. The barn sagged, beams groaning under the weight of something unseen, and at its heart the door glowed faintly along its seams. Pale light seeped out, thin at first, then stronger, casting eerie reflections on the rain. Alina froze. The men fell into silence, every face turned, weapons lowered without command. Not out of trust, out of awe, out of fear. A low hum filled the valley. Not mechanical, not natural. A resonance that sank into bones, vibrating teeth, rattling lungs. Alina's throat constricted. Every instinct screamed to pull back, to run, to order retreat. But another voice, quieter, pushed against it. "You wanted to know what you were fighting. This is it." Her brother's words echoed. She stepped forward, one boot in the mud, then another. The glow bathed her face, cold and alien. She didn't know what waited behind that door. She only knew the truth that gripped her heart with icy certainty. The firefight on the ridge hadn't been about territory or supply routes. It had been a distraction. Someone or something hadn't wanted them to open that door. Now it was too late. She stopped a few paces from the barn, rain running down her face, rifle heavy in her hands. Soldiers watched, waiting, no one daring to speak. And then, with a groan that echoed through the valley, the door slid open. Blackness, not empty, not void. A blackness that breathed, pulling at the air, sucking warmth from skin. The hum deepened, almost a voice, almost a chant. Alina's chest tightened. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard it beneath the hum, the echo of her own name. She staggered back, boots slipping in mud, pulse racing. Ramos caught her arm, steadying her. His eyes searched hers, fear raw, unhidden. "LT, what the hell is this?" She couldn't answer, not yet. Because in the darkness behind that door, something moved. Why did the air suddenly taste like iron, as if the storm itself had turned metallic? The door yawned wider, its seams glowing like veins under pale skin. Cold rolled out from the dark, pushing against the rain, cutting through soaked uniforms, crawling into lungs. Soldiers shifted uneasily, gripping rifles tighter but not firing. The silence between thunderclaps was unbearable, heavier than any barrage they had known. Alina forced her boots forward, every instinct screaming to stop. Her pulse thudded in her ears, yet she knew hesitation here would shatter the fragile control holding her men together. She was their anchor. Even if she didn't believe it herself, she had to act like she did. Behind her, someone whispered, "That's not natural." The words carried. Others muttered, low, sharp fear leaking into the group. Alina shot a glance over her shoulder, her expression cutting them off like a blade. "Hold the line." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled against the rifle. Ramos stepped up beside her, mud streaking his jaw, his breath misting in the cold air. "LT, if whatever's in there is alive, we're not equipped. We should call it in. Pull out." She swallowed, her throat tight. "And if it's not alive?" He stared at her, didn't answer, because what if the truth was worse? The glow pulsed again, steady, rhythmic. A heartbeat. She remembered the first time she touched that door, how it throbbed under her palm. The same pattern now filled the valley, sinking with the storm until it felt like the rain itself fell to its rhythm. Something shifted in the dark. A shadow against blackness, tall, wrong in its shape. The soldiers tensed, barrels rising as one. "Hold," Alina hissed. Her breath plumed in the cold. The shadow swayed, then retreated deeper into the void. For a moment she thought it was gone. Then came the sound, soft, layered, not quite a voice, not quite an echo. It said nothing, yet everyone heard it. Ramos' lips parted. "Lena." It was the first time he'd used her name since deployment began. She didn't answer, couldn't, because inside her chest something twisted, recognition, not of the form, not of the hum, but of the silence that followed it. The same silence she'd felt at the funeral. The same silence when her brother's folded flag had been pressed into her arms and everyone's voices had blurred into meaningless comfort. This absence, she knew it. Her men shifted again, some retreating half-steps, others muttering prayers under their breath. She heard Ramirez, the youngest, barely 20, whispering in Spanish, words tumbling fast, raw fear spilling. Alina's jaw clenched. If she let this break them, they'd collapse into panic, and panic here would kill more than bullets. She raised her rifle, not at the shadow, at the ground. She fired. The crack shattered the tension, ringing against the barn walls, echoing sharp through the storm. Soldiers flinched, snapping their attention back to her. Her voice cut through the air, cold, clipped. "Focus. We don't run blind, not here, not now." The steadiness returned, shaky but real. Men adjusted grips, breath steadied. She had bought them seconds, maybe minutes. Ramos' eyes drilled into her. What the hell was that? She met his gaze, unflinching. Control. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the valley. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw more figures inside the dark, dozens, standing motionless, faces hidden. Then the light was gone and only blackness remained. Her stomach knotted. She thought of her brother again, of his last words before shipping out. Don't ever confuse silence with peace. Sometimes silence is the loudest warning. What if this was what he meant? Not the war he died in, but the one waiting here. The ground trembled again. Not violent, subtle, like a drumbeat below the earth. And then from the ridge, a new light appeared. Flares arced through the storm, hissing, trailing smoke, burning bright. They weren't theirs. They fell into the valley, casting it in harsh, blood-red glow. The soldiers ducked instinctively, rifles up, eyes scanning. Movement followed, shapes descending the ridge, fast, organized, weapons flashing in the crimson light. Not the shadowy figures from before. Human, armed, militia perhaps, or something worse. Whoever they were moving toward the barn. Ramos swore, slamming a fresh mag into his rifle. They want whatever's inside. Alina's chest tightened. The pieces locked together, sickeningly clear. The firefight earlier hadn't been to drive them out. It had been to buy time, to keep them distracted until reinforcements came. They had never been the only ones hunting this bunker. Her men looked at her, waiting, rain running down helmets, breath sharp in the red light. She lifted her rifle, voice steady despite the weight crushing her chest. "We hold this ground. No one crosses that door." The storm swallowed her words, but the men understood. They formed up, weapons ready, digging into mud and fear alike. The first shots cracked from the ridge, whistling into the valley. Sparks flew as rounds struck metal, splintered beams. Soldiers fired back, the night erupting again into chaos. The barn groaned, its frame shuddering, the door pulsing brighter as if feeding off the violence. Alina fired into the storm, every round measured, her body moving on instinct. Yet her mind kept circling, looping back to that heartbeat she'd felt. That impossible rhythm that wasn't machine, wasn't human, was anything she could name. She wanted to believe this fight was about tactics, about ground, about denying an enemy their prize, but deep down she knew better. This wasn't just another battle. It was a doorway. And something on the other side had been waiting for someone to open it. A round snapped past her head, slamming into the mud inches away. She ducked, rolling behind cover, chest heaving. Her hand brushed the dirt, cold and slick, and she whispered without meaning to, "Why you?" The question wasn't for the storm, not for the militia, not even for her brother's memory. It was for herself. Why had she been the one standing here in this valley, with men looking to her for steadiness while the earth itself seemed to unravel? No answer came, only thunder, only the hum behind the door, deepening, steady, patient. Ramos slid in beside her, reloading, teeth clenched. "We can't hold forever." She nodded once, jaw tight. "Then we hold long enough." He stared at her. "For what?" Her eyes lifted toward the barn, its glow bleeding through rain. "For whatever comes next." And though her voice was steel, a shard of truth cut through her chest. She wasn't sure if she meant survival or surrender. The jungle had grown quieter after the storm, but silence never meant safety. Lee knew that better than anyone. It was the silence that followed explosions, the silence after gunfire, the silence that sat heavy over battlefields when the air was still choked with smoke. Tonight, the silence pressed down on her like a weight. She crouched under the tangled canopy of vines, the ground damp beneath her knees, eyes scanning the shadows with the calm precision of someone who had lived too long with the certainty that danger was always a breath away. Her rifle lay across her lap, not clutched in panic, but resting like an extension of her body. Her breathing was steady, the way her father once taught her to steady it before lining up a shot at cans in the backyard. Only now, the cans had been replaced by lives. The storm had broken the enemy's formations, scattered their patrols and slowed their march, but not stopped it. Through her headset, distorted by interference, she had caught fragments of chatter. The convoy was still coming, heavier than expected. Reinforcements, supplies, maybe even artillery. She had 3 days, maybe 2, before the first wave reached the valley where civilians were hidden. And she was running out of options. "Baseplate, this is Viper. Copy," she whispered, voice low, static. She adjusted frequency, tried again. Static. The storm had shredded communications, and she was alone in a jungle stretching 100 miles in every direction. She could wait for signals to clear, but waiting meant giving the enemy time. Alone wasn't new. Alone was her story. Lee pushed the thought down, the way she always did. She had been alone since the desert, since her brother's scream had gone silent beneath the roar of engines and collapsing concrete. Alone since the night she stopped waiting for anyone else to understand. A snapping branch. Her head turned instantly, every muscle tense but not twitching. She stayed still, listening. Movement, two sets of footsteps, careful, trying to be quiet but carrying the weight of gear. Too heavy to be animals. Lee slid her rifle into position, cheek pressing against the stock, her eye to the scope. The glass caught faint light. There, two enemy scouts moving between trees, rifles low but ready. They were searching, sweeping. One paused, scanning the undergrowth. He looked right toward her. Lee didn't breathe. A leaf fluttered down from above, landing softly on her boot. The soldier moved on. She watched them pass, controlled her urge to pull the trigger. 2 down would mean nothing if 10 more were nearby. Her mission wasn't to bleed the edges of their force. It was to stop the convoy entirely, to hold back the flood. When the last scout faded into the darkness, Lee lowered her weapon and exhaled. She needed more than her rifle, more than silence. She needed a plan. At dawn she moved. The jungle steamed as the sun rose, mist curling like ghosts through the foliage. She navigated by instinct more than maps, slipping through terrain the way her father had once taught her to move through woods back home. Step where the ground looks darkest. Touch the earth with the side of your foot, not the heel. Break nothing if you can help it. Hours later, she found what she was looking for. A clearing stretched ahead, not natural, cut by machines. The convoy's forward engineers had already begun clearing paths, setting markers, preparing the way for armored vehicles. Piles of earth lined the edges where heavy wheels would soon dig deeper scars. Lee crouched, eyes narrowing. The valley lay beyond. If the convoy reached this road, the civilians had no chance. She could blow the path, bury it in rock, delay them, but only if she could plant charges along the choke points. She checked her pack. 4 explosives, each rigged with pressure triggers she had salvaged from abandoned crates. Enough to cripple the road, maybe destroy the lead vehicle, maybe buy another day. One day could mean everything. But planting them meant time. Time meant exposure. Exposure meant risk. Lee touched the small chain around her neck. Her brother's dog tag, the one thing she had carried through every deployment. He would have told her the same thing he always said: risk doesn't disappear, you trade it. She traded. By nightfall, sweat soaked through her shirt as she set the last charge. Each explosive was buried beneath layers of soil and camouflaged with leaves, carefully aligned where weight would trigger devastation. She marked her path with invisible signs only she would recognize: subtle shifts in branches, disturbed moss, little tells that would guide her away quickly when the moment came. She lay flat on the ridge above the road, staring down into the clearing, waiting. The night hummed with cicadas. Her mind hummed with memory. She thought of the mothers back in the village, faces pale when she had walked through. They had asked her no questions, but their eyes had held all of them. Will you keep us safe? Will you make sure our children see tomorrow? She thought of the little boy who had tugged her sleeve, whispering, "Are you a soldier?" She hadn't known how to answer. The silence she carried had been answer enough. The rumble came near dawn. Distant at first, like thunder still rolling, then heavier, closer, shaking leaves from branches. Engines, multiple, the convoy. Lee adjusted her scope, heart steady, breath controlled. Headlights pierced the trees, beams sweeping across the cut road. Metal glinted in weak morning light. First came armored trucks, then heavier vehicles with mounted guns, soldiers riding along with alert eyes. She counted, 1, 2, 3, too many, but she had her explosives. The lead vehicle rolled onto the path. Its wheels crushed down, heavy weight pressing into soil. Lee's thumb rested on the remote trigger as her finger tightened. Nothing. Her breath caught. The first explosive didn't go off. Panic tried to surge, but she forced it down, not panic options. The soil was too wet, the charge too deep. Maybe the wires had shifted. Maybe. The second vehicle rolled forward, pressure, then. A roar split the clearing. Earth and flame erupted beneath the armored truck, hurling metal into the air, shredding wheels, fire consuming steel. The blast rippled across the path, throwing soldiers down. Screams, shouts, confusion. Lee triggered the second charge. Another explosion ripped through, collapsing the road. Smoke billowed, choking. Soldiers scrambled, firing into the tree line blindly. She stayed calm, picked targets. One shot down, another down. Her rifle whispered death through silence, each pull precise. But the convoy kept coming. More vehicles pressed forward, engines growling through chaos. They would not stop for fire, not stop for fallen comrades. And then she saw it. The last charge she had planted, closest to the valley road. If it failed like the first, everything was lost. The third truck rolled over it. Lee squeezed the trigger, nothing. Her throat tightened. The convoy roared past the dud, engines carrying them closer to the valley. For the first time in years, Lee felt fear she couldn't contain. Not for herself, for them, for the mothers, for the children. She pulled her rifle back, stood, and ran. Through the jungle, her body moved like instinct, leaping roots, cutting vines with her knife. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. The convoy was pushing through the broken road, delayed but not stopped. And she had one choice left. The last charge could still be detonated manually. Her pack slammed against her shoulders as she sprinted. She broke into the clearing ahead of the convoy, dust and smoke curling around twisted metal. Soldiers shouted as they spotted her, rifles raising. Bullets tore through leaves, the ground, splintering wood around her. She dropped, rolled, came up firing. 2 soldiers fell, the rest hesitated. Her feet pounded toward the failed charge. The device sat buried at the edge of the road, wires exposed from the pressure plate. She ripped the dirt free with her bare hands, fingers bleeding as she clawed at the casing. The convoy roared closer. A soldier shouted, gunfire. Something tore across her arm. Pain seared. She ignored it, yanked the safety wire free, and pressed her palm flat against the manual trigger. Engine screamed. Lee whispered, for them. She pressed down. The world vanished in white. The jungle was still burning when the echoes faded. The explosion had swallowed the convoy whole, metal twisted, smoke climbing the sky, the earth itself split open by the force. For a moment there was only fire and ruin, and then there was silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of something taken. Lee lay where the blast had thrown her, half buried in soil, ears ringing with the ghost of thunder. Her vision swam. Heat licked her skin and blood seeped through her sleeve where a bullet had carved its line. She tried to push herself up, but her body refused. Her breath came shallow, ragged, every inhale like dragging stone. She forced her eyes open. The valley road was gone. Where once the path had stretched clean for the convoy, now it was a scarred grave. Blackened husks of vehicles burned bright in the dawn, soldiers scattered in stillness among them. The convoy would not reach the valley. The civilians would live. Her mission was complete. And yet completion felt nothing like victory. Lee's hand fumbled against the chain at her neck. Her brother's tag was warm, pressed against her skin. She closed her fist around it, eyes blurring. I kept it, she whispered, though no one heard. I kept it for you. The first to reach her were not medics, nor soldiers from her own side. They were villagers. Mothers, children, the same ones she had seen days before, faces etched with fear. They had heard the blast, seen the fire, and they had come, hesitant but drawn by what they knew must have happened. A boy knelt beside her, the same boy who had once tugged at her sleeve. His eyes were wide, not with fear now but with something heavier. Are you alive? He whispered. Lee managed the faintest smile. Her voice rasped, weak but steady. For now. Hands lifted her, gentle though calloused. They carried her back toward the village, through jungle paths lined with smoke and silence. She drifted in and out of awareness, every step jarring pain through her body. Faces floated above her, women's tears, children's whispers, men's grim resolve. None of them looked at her as a stranger anymore. They looked at her as something else. Days blurred. When Lee awoke again, it was to the sound of wind through patched roofs, the smell of herbs ground into poultices, the soft weight of bandages pressing against her wounds. She lay in a cot inside one of the village's huts. Light filtered through cracks, painting her in broken stripes. An older woman sat nearby, grinding leaves into paste. Her hands moved with practiced care, though her face carried lines of exhaustion. When she saw Lee's eyes open, she set the bowl aside. "You should not have survived," the woman said quietly. Her voice was not unkind. "The blast should have taken you." Lee swallowed, her throat raw. "It tried." The woman studied her, eyes steady. "Why would you do it? You had no blood here, no family, you could have walked away." Lee turned her gaze toward the ceiling. The silence hung heavy before she answered. "Because too many times I didn't get there in time. Too many times I couldn't stop it. Not for him, not for the others." Her hand lifted weakly toward the chain at her neck. The woman's eyes followed, resting on the tag. "A brother." Lee nodded. Words faltered, she didn't need to say more. The silence said it for her. Recovery was slow. Her body healed in fragments, but her silence remained. She walked the village paths at dusk, children trailing behind her like shadows, whispering questions she rarely answered. Some asked about the explosion, some about her rifle. One girl asked if she was afraid when she stood against so many. Lee paused, kneeling to meet the child's eyes. "Yes," she said softly, "always." The girl tilted her head. "But you still did it." Lee's gaze drifted to the horizon. "Because fear doesn't get to choose what's right. You do." The girl thought about this, then slipped her small hand into Lee's. For the first time in years, Lee didn't pull away. News traveled as it always did. Word of the convoy's destruction spread through channels and whispers, carried by traders, scattered through radios once thought broken. A nameless soldier had stopped a force 3 times the size of the village's defenses. A single figure had turned the tide. Her silence became legend before she could stop it. They gave her names she never claimed: the ghost of the valley, the mother's guard, the silent flame. She remained only Lee. Weeks later, an extraction team arrived. Helicopters thundered through the sky, blades chopping air, soldiers in clean uniforms spilling into the clearing with precision. Their commander found her by the well-bandaged arm resting in a sling, eyes steady as ever. "Sergeant Monroe," he said, his voice formal but weighted. "We've been searching for you. Command wants you back." Lee studied him for a long moment. The noise of the helicopters filled the silence between them. Children clung to her legs, eyes wide at the sight of soldiers, machines, guns. Back. Back meant another mission, another fight, another silence to carry. She looked at the villagers, at the mothers watching from doorways, at the boy who had asked her if she was alive. She thought of her brother, of the promise she carried in the tag against her chest. Slowly, Lee shook her head. "I'm already where I'm supposed to be." The commander frowned. "You'd be walking away from duty." Her lips curved faintly. "No, I'm walking toward it." And so she stayed. Not as a soldier in uniform, but as a shadow among them, a teacher, a protector. She trained the villagers to guard their home, showed them how to move silently through the jungle, how to listen for signs of danger, how to hold a rifle without letting fear own them. She taught the children to steady their breath, to hold silence not as a weight but as a weapon. At night she sat by the fire, listening to stories spoken in languages not her own, but carried by rhythms she understood. Stories of loss, of hope, of endurance. Stories that sounded not unlike her own. For the first time, Lee's silence was not a prison. It was a bridge. Months later, when another convoy tried to push through, they found not a defenseless valley but a wall of resistance. Farmers with rifles, children guiding families to safety, mothers who no longer trembled. And in the trees above them, a single figure moved unseen, watching, guiding, silent as ever. The convoy turned back, and the legend grew. Years later, when people spoke of the war, they told many stories, of generals and battles, of treaties and borders. But in quiet corners, by firesides, in villages where children grew under skis cleared of smoke, one story returned again and again. Of a soldier who carried the soul of 1,000 mothers, buried in silence. Of a woman who stood alone against fire and did not fall. Of Lee Monroe, who found in silence not emptiness, but the voices of those she chose to protect. And in the end, that silence spoke louder than any war. End of story.